From the foregoing, it may be evident that the last thing by which each thing is ordered to an end is its operation, yet in different ways, according to the diversity of operation. For there is a certain operation of a thing as moving something else, such as heating and cutting. But there is a certain operation of a thing as being moved by another, as being heated and cut. A certain operation, however, is the perfection of a worker actually existing, not tending to be transformed into something else, the first of which differ from passion and motion. Secondly, from the transmutative action of external matter. But this kind of operation is like understanding, feeling, and willing. Hence it is evident that those things which move or work only, without this being moved or done, tend to divine likeness insofar as they are perfect in themselves. But what they do and move as such tend to a divine likeness in that they are the causes of others, but which, by the fact that they are moved, intend the divine similitude as far as both are concerned. But the lower bodies, inasmuch as they are moved by natural motions, are considered as moved only, and not as moving except by accident, for it happens to a stone that descending it impels something that meets it, and it is the same in alteration and other movements. Hence the end of their movement is that they may attain divine likeness insofar as they are perfect in themselves, since they have their own form and their own place. But the heavenly bodies move when they are moved, hence the end of their movement is to achieve divine likeness as regards both. As far as its proper perfection is concerned, inasmuch as the heavenly body is in something where it was in act, in which it was before in power, and for this reason it does not achieve its perfection any less, although it remains in potentiality where it actually was before. For in like manner also prime matter tends to its perfection by the fact that it acquires in act the form which it had before in power, although it also ceases to have another than it had before in act, into action successively, which could not be done at the same time. Hence, since the celestial body is in power to where, as the first matter is to form, inasmuch as they move by moving, the end of their movement is to achieve a divine likeness in that they are the causes of others. But there are other causes in that they cause generation and corruption and other movements in these lower ones. Therefore, the movements of the heavenly bodies, insofar as they move, are directed to the generation and corruption which is in these lower ones. Now it is not inconvenient for the heavenly bodies to move to the generation of these inferior bodies, although these inferior bodies are more unworthy of the heavenly bodies, since the end must be preferable to that which is to the end. For the benefactor acts according to the form of the begotten, when, however, the begotten is not worthy of the benefactor, but in univocal agents is of the same species with him. For the one who begets intends the form of the begotten, which is the end of generation, not as the ultimate end, but that there is a likeness to the divine in the perpetuation of his species, and in the diffusion of his goodness, through the fact that he conveys the form of his species to others, and is the cause of others. Similarly, the heavenly bodies, although they are more worthy than the lower bodies, nevertheless intend to bring their generation and the forms of the generated into action by their movements, not as if it were the ultimate end, but by this they aim at the divine likeness, as if it were the ultimate end, in that the causes of others exist. Now let us consider that each thing, insofar as it partakes of the likeness of the divine goodness, which is the object of his will, in the same way partakes of the likeness of the divine will, by which things are brought into being and preserved. But the higher ones partake of the similitude of divine goodness more simply and universally. The lower ones, on the other hand, are more particular and more divided. Whence also between the heavenly and inferior bodies, similitude is not observed according to equivalence, as in those which are of one species, but as a universal agent for a particular effect. Just as then, the intention of a particular agent in these inferiors is contracted to the good of this or that species, so the intention of the celestial body is brought to the common good of the corporeal substance, which is preserved and multiplied and increased through generation. But since, as has been said, everything that is moved, in so far as it is moved, tends to the divine likeness, that it may be perfect in itself. But let each thing be perfect in so far as it takes place in action. It is necessary that the intention of anything existing in potentiality be that it tends to act by motion. The more, then, an act is later and more perfect, the more principally the appetite for matter is carried into it. Hence it is necessary that the appetite of the matter which it desires form should tend towards the last and most perfect act which matter can achieve, just as towards the ultimate end of generation. But in the acts, certain degrees of form are found, for the first matter is in the first potential to the form of the element. But under the form of an element, it exists in potentiality for the form of a mixture. For this reason the elements are the matter of the mixture. But under the form of a mixture considered, it is in power to the vegetable soul, for the soul of such a body is an act. Likewise, the vegetable soul is a sensitive power, but the sensitive to the intellectual. This shows the process of generation. For in the first generation, the living fetus is the life of a plant, afterwards the life of an animal, and lastly, the life of man. But after this form is not found in the generable and corruptible, a later and more dignified form. The ultimate end of all generation, then, is the human soul, and towards this matter tends as towards its ultimate form. Therefore there are elements because of mixed bodies, but these things are for the sake of living, in which there are plants because of animals, but animals for man's sake. Man, therefore, is the end of all generation. For in the first generation the living fetus is the life of a plant, afterwards the life of an animal, and lastly the life of man. But after this form is not found in the generable and corruptible, a later and more dignified form. The ultimate end of all generation, then, is the human soul, and towards this matter tends as towards its ultimate form. Therefore there are elements because of mixed bodies, but these things are for the sake of living, in which there are plants because of animals, but animals for man's sake. Man, therefore, is the end of all generation, for in the first generation the living fetus is the life of a plant, afterwards the life of an animal, and lastly the life of man. But after this form is not found in the generable and corruptible, a later and more dignified form. The ultimate end of all generation, then, is the human soul, and towards this matter tends as towards its ultimate form. Therefore there are elements because of mixed bodies, but these things are for the sake of living, in which there are plants because of animals, but animals for man's sake. Man, therefore, is the end of all generation. Therefore there are elements because of mixed bodies, but these things are for the sake of living, in which there are plants because of animals, but animals for man's sake. Man, therefore, is the end of all generation. Therefore there are elements because of mixed bodies, but these things are for the sake of living, in which there are plants because of animals, but animals for man's sake. Man, therefore, is the end of all generation, but because by the same thing it is generated and preserved in being, according to the order given in the generations of things, there is also an order in the preservation of them. From this we see that mixed bodies are supported by the appropriate qualities of the elements. Plants, on the other hand, are nourished by mixed bodies. Animals have their nourishment from plants, and some even more perfect and virtuous from some more imperfect and weak. But man uses all kinds of things for his benefit, to some indeed for food and for others for clothing. Whence by nature he was appointed naked, as being able to prepare clothing for himself from others, just as nature has prepared no suitable nourishment for itself except milk, so that it may obtain food for itself from different things. But to some as a vehicle, for in speed of movement and in strength to endure labors, he is found weaker than many animals, as if other animals were prepared to help him. And on top of this he uses all the sensible things for the perfection of intellectual knowledge. Whence it is said of man in the Psalm, in direct speech to God, "You have put all things under his feet." And Aristotle says, in the first of the Politics, that man has a natural dominion over all animals. If, then, the movement of heaven itself is directed to generation, now the whole generation is directed to man, as to the ultimate end of this species. It is clear that the end of the movement of heaven is directed to man, as to the ultimate end in the genus of generable and movable things. Hence it is that Deuteronomy 4:19, it is said that God made heavenly bodies for the service of all nations.